Hey guys, thanks for joining us. We'll kind of wait as some more people kind of funnel in here. Um, yeah, thanks for joining on the Mastering THCA Crystallization webinar. While we're kind of waiting for people to funnel in here, some housekeeping. Up at the top right-hand corner, there is a couple of boxes there. There's one with a speech bubble with a question mark in it. We're going to be using that quite a bit throughout this webinar. I want to make sure that this is as interactive as possible. Obviously, your mics are off, so don't try to talk to us because we won't be able to hear you. But if you could type in one of the questions I'd like to find out right from the hop, as we're waiting for some more people to kind of pile in here, is where's everyone joining us from? It's always good to find out kind of where people are calling in from, where people are interested in scaling up their THCA crystallization. So if you've just joined in, up at the top right-hand corner, there's a speech bubble there with a question mark in it. Don't try and put it in the chat. I don't think you'll be able to enter anything into the chat. So enter it into the question bubble, and where you're answering where you're calling us from, where you're joining us. It's always good to kind of see where people are calling in from. So if you haven't done so already, make sure you add that in, and we'll get started here in probably about 15 seconds or so. Cool. Arizona, lots of Arizonas.
Where do you see the
Yeah.
answers to that, Matt?
If you click on the bubble up at the top right-hand corner, there's a
Yeah,
question,
yeah,
and
the question
that's
mark one.
the question mark
Nah, it
one.
doesn't show. All it shows me
Oh, are you not able to
is
see it,
me.
maybe?
No, I
Oh,
asked the question. I left the response, but it doesn't show me.
Germany. Cool. We got somebody from Germany, New York, Ohio, Maryland. If you're just joining in, guys, in the question mark bubble up in the right-hand corner, please just drop a line where you're joining us from. It's always great to find out where people are calling from, and we're going to get started here in just about a couple seconds. Oregon, nice. Another New York, cool. Mexico, cool. Okay, guys, we'll get started. Just keep that question box open because I'm going to be asking a lot of questions throughout the thing, and I want to make sure that this is interactive as possible. And you guys are kind of putting through, I'm able to see what you guys can respond. So let's start off with kind of what we do. Basically, what this webinar is about is our controlled crystallizer. So how do we systemize and optimize THCA crystallization? And there's a lot of different ways to do that. So we're going to review that in this webinar. We're able to do that with a lot of our bottleneck busting modules. So a lot of the work that we do is, full facility build outs for extraction equipment. One of these modules is the crystallizer. So we do a lot of integration work. We do a lot of full facility build outs and make sure that processors are optimized to kind of capture market demand and really stay ahead of the curve. And one of the ways that we do this is through our consulting and training and education. This is an example of some of the education that we really like to push. And when we feel like, knowledge is power. And so this is just one example of things that we like to share with people in the industry and feel that it's a powerful tool to kind of grow. Today's itinerary, we're going to go through some introductions here in a little bit. We're going to cover why do we crystallize. We're going to talk about some of the different crystallization methods, crashing versus growing crystals. And then we're going to talk about how do we crystallize and the different methods and kind of scales, how you can systematically kind of get in if you're just starting, and how you can scale that right into a commercial or industrial scale. While we're at this, back in the question bar, if you guys could just type in, I'm very interested to see, how much, who's currently making THCA crystals and kind of how much, what scale are you growing crystals at? How much THCA you're producing in a week or a month? If you can add in the question box, that would be very helpful to kind of tailor this this webinar to make sure we're talking to the right kind of scale, and we can go from there. So your hosts today, obviously myself. I'll maybe start with Dustin, who doesn't really need an introduction. Here he's back with us. Kind of dropped off there, but we got Dustin Powers. Dustin, you want to give a little bit of an introduction of yourself?
Yeah, I'm still here. I just don't want to distract from your pretty face, Matt. Guys, I'm Future 4200. It's probably how you know me. Been in the cannabis processing game since about 2012. Been doing large scale THCA for the last, I don't know, at least 4 or 5 years, intentionally. Did a lot of accidental THCA, the 5 years prior to that, but really like keyed into what we were doing and started locking it down with a bunch of partners, including Evolved. And so, yeah, I'm happy to see how many people are in here. That's a bit surprising, kind of, but at the same time, that's where the market's going right now. So everybody that's in here is really tuned in to, where the money's at and where the industry's at right now. So that's, I applaud you guys. So I'm really excited to be here for this call and to, help answer any questions that anyone might have and help educate everyone.
Cool. Thanks, Dustin. And yeah, I'm Matt, co-founder and senior sales executive at Evolved. And I've got a real passion for pushing, not just our clients, but the industry as a whole, kind of pushing the limits of what's possible in extraction. And this has been a real journey, being able to do that and provide some game changing education and tech to the industry and our clients specifically. So we'll kind of get into this. Let's kind of start with, why do we crystallize? What's the point? And the simple answer, you may think is, well, to make isolate. Everybody wants THC isolate, and it's a product that I can sell for a lot, and that's true. But you're missing half the equation if that's kind of your goal to just make THC isolate. We all kind of saw what happened with the distillate market, and distillate was the thing, and you're fetching high dollar for it, and it was like, let's make distillate, and then everyone jumps in and starts making distillate, and prices potentially start to plummet, and that will probably happen with THC isolate at some point. But the real advantage to THC isolate is the versatility that it creates. So if we think about being able to separate THCA and HTEs, or high terpene extract, is what we kind of call the two things that we're separating out of the crude. And we think of those things as ingredients. Those two ingredients now unlock unbelievable potential in being able to formulate those on demand, basically any concentrate that we want, any product or SKU that we want on demand to a very tight specification, which is very important. These are some of the products that you can make. I don't know, Dustin, if you've got anything to add on that, but the versatility is the big key in our mind of why THCA crystallization is the future.
Yeah, and the big one is you can directly replace your distillate with this as well. For cheaper, more efficiently, you can create THCA that you can then easily melt down to Delta 9, decarb into Delta 9, that is a better product than distillate. It tastes better, it's got better optical purity. Again, it was cheaper to even get there in the first place. I can start with a lower quality input. It really is proven to be superior to distillate in all aspects.
Well, and you get that second value stream of being able to actually collect and retain your terpenes
You
unadulterated.
haven't destroyed your terpenes. It's everything. It's the terpenes are the higher value product, and in distillation, they're a waste stream. You degrade them into some foul smelling green goo that you wouldn't even want to start a fire with. Yeah, like you've gotten rid of the most valuable part. So it's clearly superior by all metrics.
Absolutely. And you never have to deal with pesky wipers anymore clogging up in your distillate unit. And the
Broken
cool thing too is,
glassware.
yeah, exactly. And it's great for export. So, some of the groups, I saw some people from Germany joining us and other places, Mexico.
New Zealand. We had a New Zealand one. That's a hot market.
Nice, nice. Yeah. So, I mean, export, all pharmaceuticals are done by crystallization, not distillation. It's a much purer form of isolation. And so it blends very well into these, emerging international markets for a very clean spec of what you're trying to create. So those are some cool
Yeah.
things that a lot of times when we're talking to clients, they miss that whole side of the equation, and they think, it's very, I can make isolate, and isolate selling for a high dollar value. And yes, you can do that, but there's so many other better things as well to add
Right.
on to that.
And I see a lot of people, to your point, using it as an ingredient. So if you're going to infuse your pre-rolls, if you're going to, convert it to Delta 9 for edibles, it becomes the staple ingredient for basically everything down the line other than just raw flour.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about crashing versus growing. Obviously, growing diamonds in jars or miners. You're growing usually larger crystals in a lot of cases, unless you're kind of fast crashing it in a jar. But one is kind of a slow, controlled growth, where the other is a fast, kind of forcing the precipitation of the crystals out of solution. Um, and uh, between those two methods, you're going to kind of have a different output. So a larger crystal, which may be a valuable product that you want to be able to make, a bit limiting and a bit more of a novelty item in my kind of mind, especially in a maturing market. But going other the crashing of crystals for an isolate to get that versatility type product. Do you have anything to add there, Dustin?
No, I align with everything you're saying there, and I was actually reading through the questions. Do you want to? Should we answer some of these questions as we go, or should I
Sure.
just
Yeah,
flag
I
them?
I actually had closed my question box, so
I
apologies.
popped mine back up because I saw you going. No worries. So shout out to the lifetime GLG member. I see a lot of We got people that are making a few kilos a week. We got people that are doing hundreds of kilos a week. I'm gonna need this email list after here and hit up some of these people doing the hundreds of kilos. Where are you at? But one question that popped up was, have you seen decarb THCA clogging hardware more because of the difference? And then it kind of says dot dot dot. But I'm assuming that he means vape cart hardware. And the risk that you run with super high purity THCA that you melt down into D9 is that it may auto crystallize back out, and it is definitely a concern that you need to be aware of and prepare for to prevent from happening. So yeah, trying to keep your THCA well, and so if you go D9, that's the preventative step, right? Don't put THCA in your vape cards. Convert it to D9 and put it in the vape cards first, and then you won't have any crystallization issues. And then another one before we leave the questions and go back to the program is, does CRC fit into the mix? And these questions, I see, you can click on it. So it says, does it fit into the mix in your continuous run SOP? I'm not seeing time to reload CRC stack. Do you do crude? So with, specifically with the evolved setup, I've watched Linden run extremely low quality crude through the setup, no CRC, and crash THCA out. So I'm assuming that's why you don't have it so much in the timeline on your workflow, because you don't necessarily need it. Is that accurate?
Yeah, absolutely. So isolation, crystallization is a remediation step in itself. So especially, if we're looking kind of upstream in the extraction process, a lot of these systems have a standardized CRC in line, and that kind of is not ideal for a couple of different reasons. One, it's just part of the SOP. No matter what we're doing, we just run it through CRC because that's just in the SOP and it's in line of our process. It also slows down your extraction process. And the goal with extraction is extracting as much as you can, as fast as you can. We find that if you crystallize first, then you can look at your HTE fraction, which is going to be about a third of the crude generally. And then that means that you're using a third less of your media for CRC. You can CRC it if you need to CRC it. You may not need to. Maybe this was a nice run and it's nice and light in color. It doesn't have any pesticides that you're trying to run. And it also doesn't affect any of the, grabbing onto THC or THCA and kind of lowering your extraction efficiency as well. So there's a lot of reasons
Absolutely.
why we like to push CRC to the back end of this process. Only use it if we need it. Maybe we need to run it twice or three times through CRC. We can do that if it's at the end of the process as opposed to inline in the extraction process.
Yeah, and that's an expensive input. And if you're just gumming it up with fats and lipids right off the bat, you're gonna have a bad time.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Another
Uh,
question before we move on. Yeah, someone else said CRC is so expensive. Correct. Another question: what kind of percentage of THC are we seeing from the isolate? Upper nine, like mid 90s on a first crash, up to upper 90s, depending on how slow you go. And it's really simple to remelt, especially in a system like Evolve puts out there, to remelt it in place and do a secondary crystallization to get it up into those, upper 90 percentage, no
yeah,
problem. And it says best option for the decarb. And he says, example, a stir plate, a vac oven with or without vac, nitrogen sweep, reactor. And a lot of that depends on your scale. But yeah, doing it with an inert gas over the top is going to help with the oxidation risk that you might have. So I would suggest some sort of sweep gas on top of whether that's a hot plate or a reactor, something to keep oxygen out of the mix as much as possible.
Absolutely. And also potentially doing it as close to when you're, let's say we're filling a vape cart or something. Keep it as isolate as long as you can and for storage, and then decarb it as you need it to help avoid some of that
Right.
oxidation and stuff like that.
Absolutely. It's extremely stable in its THCA isolate form.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
Coming back
do
to this,
you want to
and
go?
keep the questions
Yeah, go back.
coming. Keep the
Yeah.
questions coming.
I'll grab Daniel's after we do our next little round of information here.
Cool. This just kind of shows temp over time, kind of the difference between growing crystals and cracking crystals. Obviously, we're in the growing crystals where our time is in days, as opposed to crashing crystals, our time is in minutes. And so the idea is to quickly crash it and get finer crystals. That then, if we wanted to grow larger crystals, we can do that by removing all the things that inhibit crystallization and slow it down into the day time frame to grow larger crystals if that's what you want to do, or keep it as isolate, melt it down, make all these different formulation products as you kind of need them. And so there's definitely a correlation between both efficiency of the separation between these two things and time. And so the balance becomes we want to do it quickly, but we also want to make sure we're pulling out as much of that THCA as possible so that our crystallization efficiency is high and we're not having a lot of it carry over into our HTE. So the different scales, it sounds like some of you guys are doing, hundreds of kilos. I don't know if it was a week, Dustin, that you saw, but those are
Yeah,
big numbers.
there's a couple in there, a couple that
Cool.
were like hundreds a week.
Fantastic. Yeah, those are big numbers. Obviously, you're not doing jar tech. For the guys that are kind of just starting out, this is a really good way to start adding crystallization capacity to your process. Obviously, it's very easy to enter with a couple jars and stuff like that, and start to crash stuff out in jars. But it's also very labor intensive, and you can imagine once you start scaling to dozens or hundreds of jars, now you're not only dealing with managing 100 different little vessels, but you're also managing how do I clean these vessels, how do I get the product out, and a whole bunch of other kind of things that inhibit us to really scale the way that we need to scale to do larger crystallization. But it's a cool way to experiment, and it's also a cool way to kind of get into the market. Anything to add there, Dustin?
Just it's where the vast majority of people start, and it's probably where I would suggest starting to kind of get your hands on and the feel for the process. And it's very visual in a jar like that, so you can really start to because
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of graphs and numbers that you're going to see today, but there is some element of this that's still a little bit by feel and sight when you're trying to lock in viscosity and what should this look like when I'm going into crystallization. A lot of it has to do with just kind of seeing the thing I found, and so it can help going through that process first to kind of get your head around it.
Absolutely. The next kind of scale is miners generally is the next leap up. Miners are generally kind of also thought of as making bigger crystals. You could also replicate what's happening in jars. Basically, a miner could be used as a just a bigger jar in the sense if we wanted to kind of fast crash. Um, but generally, miners are kind of thought of as growing larger crystals and could be implemented, after the larger scale, putting it into an actual reactor or controlled crystallization reactor, for example, and removing some of those things that inhibit crystallization to grow those bigger diamonds, those bigger stones faster. But yeah, diamond miners are generally the next progression past jars. And then into the commercial size or industrial scale of crystallization, pushing the limits and getting it into a reactor. This is an example. This is basically our controlled crystallization reactor. This is what we tie into the back end of hydrocarbon units, also some It can be used on the backside of heptane extraction units as well, but generally for hydrocarbon. As you can see, the first vessel there with the mixer on it is where the crystallization is sort of happening. That's where we're starting to grow those crystals in solution and have the crystals kind of precipitate out. And then we've got our other vessel there on the right-hand side that's going to be collecting our HTE. And there's a couple of different ways that we can look at doing this, but maybe what we'll do first is just kind of show you what it looks like, what the process starts to look like as you see the crystals kind of precipitating out of solution. You can see the lighter sort of substance there is the THCA, and the darker substance is our HTE. And we call this the snow globe effect. So this is a very visual process still. Dustin mentioned, jars are nice because you can see what's happening. Even when we get into the reactor size, we've got on our unit, for example, we've got big 3-inch, sight glasses. It's still a very visual process, and we're trying to look for visual cues as to when the kind of crystallization is ready to be, start that separation process. But this is kind of in the early stages here. And again, it's what we call kind of the snow globe effect, or the crystals starting to pop out of solution. This is kind of shows cases how quickly the process can happen once you're scaled. And those guys making, 100 kilos a week, you guys are doing this as well. So I mentioned earlier, you can see this is in real time. I'll play that again. You can see that the isolate just sort of overtakes the entire vessel, and the HTE is being drained out and separated. I'll pause it there. At this first crash, Dustin was kind of talking about, at this stage, we're probably in the low 90s percentage-wise of what isolate is in there, like the potency. And at this stage is where we would do a rinsing process. So we would actually now start to rinse this isolate with really cold butane. And the reason why we want it to be really cold at this stage is because we don't want to melt or dissolve any of these crystals that we just spent time, creating. And so we're really trying to rinse it and purify it. And that's going to get it up into the 99+% range to then be ejected. And there's a few different ways that we can eject that.
And this speaks to the benefit of doing this in the reactor, which is in the C1D1 room. We can wash in place with more clean hydrocarbon. When you're doing this in a miner or a jar, that becomes much more difficult, much more involved, much less safe.
Yeah. It also becomes harder to get a very efficient separation. So, with jars or other tech, a lot of times it's like, 50%, 40%. Sometimes there's a lot of carryover in that HTE, not necessarily because it didn't crystallize, but because it's so fine or difficult to actually separate out the HTE from the THCA. And so that's a very important aspect as well. And why our system's called the controlled crystallization reactor is the control piece. And so, you guys are probably familiar with fast crashing. You can take a jar, throw it in the freezer, just blast it with cold and fast crash it. That works great. The problem with that is the faster you crash it, the finer and siltier the crystals are, meaning that it's more prone to clogs, and it's also harder to separate those two things and purify them. I like to think of it as, if we fast crash and we've got really fine crystals, it's kind of like a silt that we're trying to, get mud, clean off, as opposed to gravel. And so we're controlling the crash so that we can grow these crystals to about 100 micron crystal size, so that we have a nice permeable bed, kind of like gravel, and we can easily rinse that gravel off and make sure that all the impurities are off, and the efficiency of that crystallization is, really, really well as well. So
yeah, and Andrew, I hope that answers Andrew's question of how do you remove the THCA after crystallizing. So by controlling the size and what we've got for a filter on there, we can control whether we're going to filter, impurities out, or maybe we've got an open drain because we're in a secondary step and we're able to just then dump them out. And you can also pop the top off and harvest off the top as well. So, and it's the beauty of, I'm not trying to upsell you here, but if you've got two of their reactors, one of them can have a filter screen and the other one cannot, and then you can grow them out in one, filter it, and then dissolve them, and then grow it out in the other one, and then that way you can dump them back out.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, there's some new tech that we've also got. Basically, we call it our THCA filter unit, and we actually have now found, some of the biggest bottlenecks of this process are rinsing the crystals and making sure that we get a good separation, and then the ejection. How do we get access to those crystals? And so this filter unit, which we'll kind of, maybe I'll dive into that, kind of skip through some of this, but our filter unit is kind of a new thing where we're taking, I'll actually go back one and show you this. If you guys can see down here, hopefully this is big enough for you guys' screen, but we would do the separation in our crystallization vessel, the vessel with the agitator. And so we're looking for those visual cues of, okay, the snow globe effect is happening. We're seeing that there's good crystal size and there's a good, it's homogeneous in the crystallization vessel. And instead of doing the separation in that vessel, where we're now filtering through, a 6-inch filter plate at the bottom, we say, no, we're going to send that whole solution over to one of our filter units, which is basically, a column, a 6-inch column with a filter insert that's going to collect all of the crystals inside of that filter. It's going to allow for a much more effective rinse because it's not just having to rinse through a flat 6-inch plate. It's got a whole bunch of surface area that it can filter.
Is that a sock?
And clean? No, it's actually a stainless steel insert.
A basket? Yeah, right. Sure.
Reinforced. Yeah, and it sits right in the column.
Sweet.
And so you get a way better rinse effectiveness and speeds that whole process up. But it also allows you, when it's time to get access to those crystals, you literally just pop the lid off and pull this filter out and dump it out. And I've
got it in a basket. It's in a basket. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got some video of kind of what that looks like. So you can see here in this first video, we just kind of pop the lid off, and there's the isolate all nice and washed, ready to be accessed. And then we're going to pull in this next video the basket out. This is actually an older version. I should probably update this, but the new version is like a reinforced stainless steel plate. It's really reinforced rather than this. We're getting rips with this. But you can see this is about 2.5 to 3 kilos of isolate that he's just going to be scooping out. It's fairly degassed and it's good powder size. So this would probably go into an oven for a couple minutes, just do a final kind of degas, maybe more than a couple minutes. But it's ready to go. Basically, it's ready to go into storage. And then you can kind of see.
It looked, was that what is what Amon's wiping out of there? Is that a secondary crystallization? It looks pretty pure.
No, this is a first. So, but let's say that you needed to, you started, sometimes what you can see is like little pockets potentially in the middle, especially if the sock is too long. And so if you did need to do a rewash, you can very easily just send this back into the crystallizer and redo the process again. It's obviously going to be a lot quicker because there's much less, HTE that you're trying to pull out or impurities.
Would you do that in line, or would you just dump this back into the top of the reactor?
You'd probably have to dump it in, or you could also, if you knew it before opening it up, you could just put it in and then shoot it with hot.
Or even if I got, and then back on. Because if I got halfway through and I'm dumping it out and all of a sudden it starts turning yellow, I might stop, put that back in, and go from there.
Dump it with hot butane, let the crystals melt back into solution, send it back to the crystallizer, and just quickly do it again. Absolutely.
Yeah, sweet.
And then, that isolate, we kind of talked about growing larger crystals, but one of the things that I wanted to highlight is if larger crystals are something that is, a SKU that's popular for you guys or you want to be able to make, you can absolutely still do that. You would redissolve that isolate back into butane and put that into a miner. And because, as I mentioned before, we removed all the things that inhibit crystallization, terpenes, fats, waxes, that kind of stuff, the stuff that's in the HTE. This now crystallizes extremely quickly, and it doesn't need any temperature control. It doesn't really need anything. As long as it's got a pressure relief valve on it, set to about 15 to 20 PSI, the evaporation of butane over time is going to change that solubility curve and really make those crystals pop and grow. And you're able to get sort of a 0.5 gram to a 1 gram stone as quickly as 12 to 36 hours. So as opposed to weeks or potentially months to grow crystals that size. So maybe look back at the questions. Have you seen anything come up?
We should definitely. Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to start back with some of the earlier ones and we'll go from there. So first one is, Oh no, we hold on. We already did that one. So, having fats would make more of a butter batter consistency. I'm deep in the woods and it's hard to get dry ice. So how do I do it cold? Yes, but also we can crystallize around a bunch of those lipids. So yeah, ideally you're extracting super cold, so you're leaving those in place. But even if not, if you have to extract those, you can still get to proper, THCA saturation that you can get it to crash out, and maybe you will retain some of those lipids on your THCA, which maybe then just needs a secondary wash, right? So the more lipids, the more likely you are to have to do multiple recrystallization slash wash steps. So ideally, leave those in place by running cold. If you can't, there's a way around it.
Yeah,
Um, another
or doing a winter like a filtration, a dewax step before you try to
a
crystallize.
physical dewax,
Yeah. The
correct?
problem
Yeah,
with fats and waxes is they start to coagulate and they look very similar to those visual cues of crystallization. And so you could be
right.
sitting there for a long time being like, oh man, it's right on the verge. It's looking like it's going to start to go. And it's not. It's just that the fats are all, congealing and it's very similar to what it looks like when the THCA is precipitating out. So yeah, a dewax first if you know that it's got a lot of fats in it, do a dewax on it first, and then you're going to save yourself a lot of time in the
Yeah,
crystallization process.
absolutely. Did you mention fully decarb THCA from crystallization can recrystallize? No, we did not. That most likely will not happen. Um, let's see. I collect 15 to 2,500 pound extractions in a vessel after cold crashing, then doing multiple crashes and rinses to achieve non-detect and remove pesticides. Any insight on that process? Nope. Sounds pretty good. Like, if crystallization, as Matt said, is a step towards purity, and if whatever it takes to not have to do CRC, in my mind, is typically the cheaper route. So if you're leaving your pesticides behind and the fats and lipids or wherever, as long as it's not in the target output, that sounds like a great process. Um, this guy, do you prioritize DWAX at the extraction by running ultra cold? We answered that yes. You should try to leave it up front with cold. Um, does speeding up the growing and crashing process affect the HTE clarity? Doesn't the HTE continue to crash if it hasn't been given enough time to fully separate? Yeah, so you're right, but if we look at the total time scale, instead of just in this one process, but we look at it over the entirety, I would argue that it might be faster to do a quick crash of the majority of the THCA. And I might even take that now, HTE that still does have 10, 20, 30% THCA. I might set it aside and then accumulate, depending on, my batch requirements, accumulate a bunch of that HTE, mix it together, and then do a crystallization from that net batch of all these, secondary HTE accumulations all at once, maybe at the end of the week or something, because it's going to be a much lower volume. So rather than sit for a week and try to get that last 20, 30% out, I could set it to the side and do a single run at the end of the week. And when I look at that over the course of a month, you'd find that that's going to be more efficient in my mind.
Yeah, and what we also see is like with that HTE, you have all this HTE kind of piling up, and you're like, hey, it's got some stuff in there that I don't want to, maybe I don't want to send it through a wiper. There's always the alternative of sending it through. If you've already got distillation capacity, just send it through distillation, especially if those terps aren't nice. But if they are, and we are concerned about getting that THCA out, what we find is that over time, the THCA actually starts to solidify and it starts to collect all at the bottom. And so you can almost start
Yeah.
doing like pours off of like the mother liquor on the
Yep.
top and collect
Decanting.
all
Yeah.
of these vessels of HTE, put that back into the crystallizer and recrash it as well. So
Yeah, for
there's
sure.
a couple of
And
different ways of doing that.
of course, and this line leads right into Ryan's question: what's everybody doing with their HT byproduct? It's a good. That's where a lot of people that have this leftover distillation equipment, that's what they're using it for, is HT distillation. And guys, the tip there is to start out with very low or no temperature and see what you can get to distill at room temperature just with vacuum, so that you're
Mhm.
not introducing extra heat into these terpenes, and you can get a very good terpene distillation at room temperature.
Yeah, and one thing to consider as well, what's the quality of your HTE? If your HTE is like you ran some nice fresh frozen runs, it's killer terps in that HTE, and your plan is to just reformulate it back into the THCA, maybe your concern shouldn't be let's get every last bit of THCA out of it because we're formulating those things back together. So it's
Right.
not as it's not like it's a loss; it's getting back into the product, but really understanding where this product going? if it's crappy biomass that's got terps that we definitely don't want to use, but we want to make sure that we capture the value of not only the THCA that it might have carried over, but any of the THC. So THC is not going to crystallize no matter how long you give it. So anything upstream, while it was growing on the plant, during the trimming process, during the drying process, anything that's had time to decarboxylate during that, upstream of extraction is going to end up in that HTE regardless. Usually it's pretty low, but you still potentially want to be able to capture that. And so, yeah, having an access to throwing it through to distillation is a valuable step for sure.
Here's another one. I've grown huge crystals, but they chalked back to isolate. That's a notorious Medusa problem. Most likely an issue with your gas. Potentially also could be a problem with some impurity that was in the initial biomass. That's a much deeper conversation than we have time for today. I suggest getting onto Future 4200 and looking up Medusa stones and digging into that. You'll spend the next couple of days reading, and then you'll be in about the same position that I am now with. Hard to say. Could be lots of things. Not a good solid answer. I feel for you. I'm sorry.
Yeah, one of the things too as well,
It's,
if you guys want to add in the chat, we'll keep answering some of these questions here, is we do have a THCA, it's more of on our crystallizer, an ebook. If you're interested if you haven't already got a copy of this, we haven't been in communication yet, and you want one, just write ebook into the question section and we'll send one over to you guys. It's got a lot of cool information in there. And kind of goes into some of the deeper things as well. And while we're on the topic, if you're interested in our next webinar, we don't have a date released for it yet, but it will be on maximizing THCA yields, I believe. If you're interested in that, just type webinar in the question box as well, and we'll make sure that the registration and date details come out for that for our next.
who are you doing? Who's the guest for that one?
Adam is going to be
Great.
CEO, and my co-founder is Adam. He's going to be doing it, and he's fun to watch. So
Absolutely, he knows his stuff. All
Um,
right, let's keep. You want to keep doing questions, or do you want to go back
let's do
to?
it. Go for
Okay,
it.
so here's another one. Guy wants to refine his question. He said, if I imagine I'm starting with a high percent, 97 to 99% THCA, with a simple decarb, what's my ending THC percentage going to be in the D9? Well, so first of all, keep in mind that you're going to lose 10 to 15% on the conversion. Your carboxylic acid is going away, and there's a net loss. But your potency of that D9 should be in the upper 90s right off the bat. If you're working with a really pure input, you should have a really pure output.
Yeah, potency and yield or weight get interchanged a lot, and so making sure that there will be a weight loss, but not a potency loss generally.
Right. How does one minimize oxidation in liquid diamond vape carts? And that's a very good question. As the high purity delta 9 is extremely liable to oxidize and to convert to, or not necessarily convert, but to change colors, like get pink, get weird, turn red, look nasty. So two things. First of all, minimizing the amount of oxygen that it's exposed to, both while you're heating it for the decarb, but then all of your post processing until it gets into that vape cart is huge. And then also getting a good amount of terpenes and other flavonoids in there. A lot of them can help to be a protectant, an antioxidant. And then honestly, a little bit of lipids can help as well. And I'm talking just a few percentage, but that can definitely, and you can see that in like lower quality distillate doesn't always oxidize, and you wonder why. It's part of it is some of that lipid input. But the best thing you can definitely do is preventing that oxygen, which is required for oxidation, right? So minimizing that throughout all the process. A big one where you'll do it all right. You'll have beautiful liquid diamonds, and then you go put it in your vape cart filler, and the thing gets exposed to a bunch of heat while it's filling in the vape cart filler, and it's open on the top of the vessel on the vape cart filler, just sitting there exposed to air while hot. So making sure that you're protecting it at all steps is going to help you a lot.
Absolutely. And one of the things too that we kind of didn't touch on the versatility of crystallization. Let's say you did make a whole bunch of vape carts and they didn't have a chance to get to market, or they got sent back or whatever because they were dark and they weren't selling. You can take that now, put it back into your crystallizer, re-separate out everything, and do it. Although if it's now that I'm thinking about it, if you've converted it into D9, maybe not, but products that you can't sell, products that you've made too much of, that haven't been decarboxylated, you can put that back into the crystallizer and re-separate that and turn it into a SKU that is going to sell. And so that's another versatility play that THCA crystallization offers as well.
Yeah. Next, another question. What type of solvents are you using to crash? What types of butane? Intane, iso, propane, pentane? What I've seen up with Linden is primarily butane, potentially a slight butane blend, and then occasionally a propane injection to change the solubility near the end. But you can use any of those mentioned solvents to crash.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. We're kind of
pentane,
moving away
in
from
pe-
propane a little bit.
sure.
If you're using a blend, we keep it consistent with whatever's kind of going on in your extraction process. But we can get really good results with just pure butane, with kind of the revisions and upgrades that we've done on the system and kind of dialed in these processing parameters.
Yeah, and mostly everybody's come away from pentane just because it can be difficult to get the pentane back from the diamond. It's a good solvent for recrystallization, but it becomes when you're looking at residual pentanes on your testing, especially if you're trying to grow larger diamonds, that can become an issue. So ideally, you've got a setup where you don't need to use pentane either.
Yeah.
Um, Next question, is it possible to crystallize with heavy presence of fats? Yes. Possible? Yes. Optimal? No, definitely not. Could be possible those fats precipitate prior to nucleation. Yeah, that's the cold crash, right? You cold crash out your fats and you keep your desirables in solution, and then you crystallize those out afterwards, and that's kind of the natural progression. The risk though is if you extract all those fats that you entrain a bunch of your THCA in those fats, and then so you've got
Yeah.
lipids that got 10-20% THCA, which then becomes difficult to get those out, and I'm wasting time trying to re-dissolve the fat THCA sludge into more solvent just to cold crash again. So it's always best just to leave that in place at the get-go, if possible. Um, can I use the filter unit to dewax? I think he's talking about the basket. Can you pipe
Yeah,
around? It's probably
you can use it probably wouldn't be ideal. You can use the filter column. So you could basically be swapping out the insert. We do have these candlestick filters that we do use for a dewax. It's a basically similar to like a sintered disc, but it's a long tube. We call it a candlestick filter. You could have it where hey, we're gonna do our dewax, and you have that in. You pull that out for the dewax, and then you put in your insert for collecting crystals. But I don't know how ideal the collecting fats in that actual THCA basket is going to be. Number one, you're going to dirty it up with fats and waxes, and then you're not going to have anything for crystals, and it might not be ideal for capturing that.
yeah.
But the housing,
Evan said, okay, we'll keep going. Evan asks, can you use super cold butane to eliminate having to use pentane, or is there some advantage to using pentane for cleanup? The real advantage to pentane is that it's liquid at room temperature. So if I don't have a big reactor and I don't have, let's say, a miner, if all I'm doing is jars and it starts to get like in a weird situation where I've got so many jars that I'm trying to make like powdered isolate out of that I need to clean up with some liquid pentane. And so, like, if you're at that scale and you find yourself in that spot, it's time to invest into a miner, because then in a miner, I can run cold, ideally I could run cold butane through the thing again in a closed loop back into my extractor, my still. So that's the primary advantage, is that it's liquid. So the advantage of pentane is that I can do small scale trials to really like lock in the tech. Like if, especially if I've never done any kind of crystallization before, it can be sometimes helpful. Like even up in at the classes, sometimes we'll do a little pentane demonstration just to kind of, but that's like rudimentary crystallization, just trying to wrap our heads around it. You might as well just start with some sugar and some water and make some sugar crystals.
right?
So really, there is no real benefit to pentane in my mind if you can use one of these gaseous hydrocarbons instead.
Yeah, especially if you're using that for the extraction process upstream. And so getting away from having to use multi different solvents for different things, it's one process in line using one solvent, and that's it. So, keeping things simple.
Yeah. How much D9 THCA could be in a solution without impeding nucleation and growth? trying to think of what situation, like you mean, I guess maybe the question is like if you've got a bunch of really old material that's done some sort of decarb on its own, you don't typically see a bunch of D9 in the initial solution. Um, and then so maybe the time and place where this would happen is I'm trying to introduce a little bit of D9 into a heavy THCA to prevent it from crystallizing.
Mm,
Like so, when you, for instance, you're making liquid diamonds. Step one, you melt the stuff down. It hasn't started to decarb yet, but now it's liquid. And if anybody's done this and stopped right there, if you don't pour that out into a shatter, it just turns into a like a big giant rock of THCA in the jar or whatever, and it kind of be like you have to melt the stuff back out or chisel it out. So then the theory, like I know at least like 30% D9 right there typically will prevent that from crystallizing. Again, depends on purity. And I would be surprised if you could get it to crystallize at anything over 50% D9. And so then, and along that line, that might be a good way to help prevent oxidation because if I've got a, say, a vape cart that's 50% THCA, 50% D9 that doesn't crystallize, it might be less liable to oxidize because of all the THCA in there. But that's a very variable question. Somewhere between like 20 and 60% is going to be enough, depending on what your, what quality of THCA you had. Matt, here's a question that you should be able to answer. What are typical rinse and rewash times for a 160-pound run of trim? So let's assume that's like 5% trim. So like that's 10 to 60. So like 8 pounds of THCA. So like what, like 3 to 4 kilos of THCA. How long does it take to rinse and react and rewash?
yeah. So I guess it depends on, do we have the filter unit or not? And the reason why we created the filter unit was because a lot of the time was taking actually getting a nice rinse. The other thing is with the crystallizer, we're wanting to maximize how big the batches are. So instead of it, we want to have, do 15 kilo batches as opposed to 3 kilo batches because it's going to take about the same amount of time to do the crystallization process. It might be a little bit longer to do the rinse, but you're going to have a much more isolate per the time that it's going to take you. So that's one of the
Right.
things that we talk a lot about is maximizing the size of the crystal batches instead of doing, if your extraction can't keep up, maybe not doing a crystallization at the end of every shift, but building up our crude over multiple days and then doing one big crystallization on a certain day when we've built up enough crude. We've worked on projects all over the place where people are doing a crystallization at the end of the shift because their crude production is so high, and all the way down along the lines of, there's 4 days of extraction to build up enough crude to do, a couple big crystallizations on Friday kind of thing. Time
Yeah,
wise,
absolutely.
you're looking at about, 1 to 2 hours to get all the parameters sort of dialed in and get a nice separation. Again, I mentioned that there's a definite correlation with how long we wait and how effective the separation is. So how much crystals we're actually going to be able to capture that aren't still in the isolate. And so there's a bit of a cost benefit analysis to be done there. But having the filtration unit not only allows us to have a quicker way of ejecting out the crystals, but it allows the rinsing process, which can sometimes take, if you've got really kind of crappy, you got a lot of stuff you got to rinse out of there, that process can take a long time. But when you put it over to a filter unit, not only does that free up the crystallizer to do your next batch of crystallization, but it also makes a much more effective way of rinsing off those impurities because it has way more surface area to kind of rinse properly, and as opposed to just kind of rinsing through a massive brick of isolate through a tiny little 6-inch port at the bottom filter screen.
Yeah,
So that can be
absolutely.
drastically increased, in within a couple of hours. We've seen in sometimes if it's really, greasy material where there's a lot of impurities and stuff, sometimes that can take 5, 6, 7 hours even for a big batch of isolate in a bigger vessel. But we can reduce that, by 25% or 75% time by putting it over into the filter and really optimizing that.
Yeah.
Answer your
Wes has a question. Can you take two ingredients and mix back together to make a batter slash butter like product? And if so, does that make sense to do? And I think that like really, brings it right back home to where we started. And the answer is like unequivocally yes, absolutely. To the chagrin of rosin makers everywhere, you can take THCA and high quality HTE and whip it into something that most consumers couldn't tell you the difference. Even I bring this up because just a few weeks ago I was in New York and I had done this. I had took a bunch of THCA powder. I had some really nice HTE. I had just whipped it together in front of the investors and they were like, "Oh my God, this is incredible!" And then my super heady rosin guy walks in the door and says, "Sorry, I'm late." I slide the jar over to him and I said, "Look at this." And he looks at me and he could not tell whether I was showing him rosin or BHO right here. And he said, "What is this?" And I said, "It's rosin." And he looked at it and he's like, "Man, I can't even tell the difference." And he was like, "Of course it's not rosin, it's BHO." And he's like, "Man, I would have believed you." He's like, "I had no choice but to believe you." And it's what I've been smoking on at home is just a mix of THCA with some really high quality HTE, mixed into the perfect batter consistency I want. And you just you modulate the amount of HTE to get between that butter, batter, whatever consistency you want. And if you don't whip it, you can pour it out into shatter. And so that slide Matt showed right at the beginning is, perfectly representative of the beauty of having these ingredients and be able to formulate it into whatever you want.
Yeah,
So yeah, it makes a lot of sense to do so.
exactly. You can make it to either a very tight specification of we want our product to be exactly the same every single time, and not having to worry about, hey, what's coming out of this, collection pot better be good because that's what we got. We can maybe make some changes to it. But this really allows you to not only make things to a tight spec, but play around, become, a chef and start making these crazy products. And hey, I wish this had a bit more, these kind of terps in it, or I wish it was a bit more, battery. You can do all those things a lot more seamlessly by thinking of these as ingredients and making your product as opposed to hoping for the best as you pour it out of the collection pot.
Absolutely. Another person, my crew tested at 20% D9 because of the extraction method, CO2. Just go ahead and stop right there, and that's all your problems are because of your CO2. Whatever it takes to get away from that. um, have you guys redissolved ethanol diamonds with BHO diamonds and miners to make bigger crystals? Yeah, diamond's a diamond. Doesn't matter how you got there. Um, how can I calculate an average return for crystals? Is there a formula? If you have a potency on your initial starting extract or starting material, and you know how much THCA is there, you should be able to get pretty close to that number. I would say like within 20% is more than safe, and then that last 20% is definitely achievable. It's just on diminishing returns, and again, depends on how much fats and lipids in your, all the variables. But like getting 80% of that back as THCA is not unreasonable.
Yeah, and Daniel, I can answer that as well. If you want to reach out, I can. We've got some calculators that might be able to help in that as well to kind of dial in some metrics and see what get at least a range.
Yeah. Can you can you elaborate more on how you'd make shatter from THCA powder and HTE? Is it heated after it's mixed to melt everything down? Yeah. So first thing I do is melt the THCA, and that's heated up until it just starts to melt. And then I'm going to real quickly whip in my terps, and I'm going to pour it out on a sheet I'd say parchment paper, but there's issues there with the plastic and the parchment paper. So, take that at your own risk, figure out what it's going to be that you pour it out on. Isn't it going to crash out? Yeah, it crashes out into one giant crystal that's very thin, which is thus your shatter, right? And then you take that big sheet of crystal that you now have and you smack it against something hard, it shatters, right? That's the name. That's why it's called shatter. It's just one big crystal in a very weird shape, right? It's a big flat pan of crystal.
Right.
And so no, it doesn't crash out if you take care of the thing and you're careful with it and you've got good pizza box tech, right? But if you ding it, then it's going to shatter into all sorts of little crystals and be everywhere and be a mess. But it's super simple. Making shatter from not liquid diamond, from THCA that you just melted enough for it to turn liquid is one of the simplest formulations that there is.
Cool.
Any advice to prevent any advice while crystallizing in a mason jar to prevent pucking? Burping appropriately seems to be the move there. Like at the right time to open and close the lid real quickly, that burp causes that bubbling of all the solvent in the middle because of the change in head pressure. So all of a sudden, a bunch of that solvent ideally you're getting the solvent that's trapped underneath your puck to burp up, or right before you're forming a solid puck, and that agitation in there um, breaks up that puck and makes loosies. So timing is the big one. More solvent is not usually the answer, especially not in a little jar like that. It'd be very difficult to open it up, put more solvent in. Um, I've seen guys shake it at the right time now, and safety with all of this. Like, this is what I've seen people do. It's not necessarily what I recommend, but shaking the jar at the right time can help prevent a hard puck from forming in the jar. But keep in mind that you're shaking a glass jar full of hydrocarbons, and take that at your own risk.
With those
Maybe don't put it real close to your face while you do it. Do
you
it
know
as far away from your face as possible.
those silicone jar caps that have the little burping nipple on them that Murphy had?
Yes.
Would those work
Yeah.
really well?
Maybe yeah, I mean, if you can control the burp, yeah, that'd be great, instead of just having. But I mean, even if you don't have that, you just got a regular lid. All you have to do is crack the ring slightly, because that
Right.
now allows the lid to come up off the jar without it opening and exploding out or whatever. So just a slight crack, and you'll see it because it'll start bubbling immediately because the head pressure's changing. That's usually enough to keep the puck from forming.
Cool. Yeah, one of the things, we've got about 3 minutes left for our scheduled time. Obviously, we want to make sure that all the questions get answered, and we'll do our best to answer them all in the time allotted for the webinar. If we don't get to them, we will reach out to you and make sure that you get an answer. Just as an FYI. The other
Yeah.
thing that I wanted to kind of mention before we end here is. We mentioned Adam will be doing the next webinar. Actually, Adam and I are planning a few different regional, tours around. We love getting into clients' facilities. Kind of our next one coming up is New York, New Jersey region, but we've got a whole bunch of other things on our menu of where we want to go. If you're interested in that, just write in the chat audit. We'd love to come by and do an optimization audit and kind of see what you guys are doing. There's a lot of usually low hanging fruit that we can kind of advise on. It's also great to kind of get out into labs and meet you guys in person and shoot the shit. So if you specifically are in the New York or New Jersey area and are interested in an audit, let us know. We'll be out there in the next couple of weeks, next week or next 2 weeks, I believe. But there's other places that we want to go. And obviously, if there's a lot of people in a certain region, we're happy to kind of focus in that region and get out there sooner. So if you're interested in that, again, just make sure you write audit in the chat and we can kind of link up and see how we can make that work.
Awesome. Yeah.
I guess the
I'm
last
answering some of.
question, go
Go
ahead.
ahead. I was just going to say, I'm answering some of these people like directly. One of them, how should THCA be stored? Is moisture absorption bad? If it's a really, really fine powder, then it could clump a little bit if it gets moist. Keep in mind that THCA is hydrophobic, so it's not like water is not a huge issue with it. Keep it in a cool, dark place. Put it in a lot of people just put it in turkey bags that they tie and put it in a bucket. And I've worked with hundreds of kilos of THCA like that, and never once have I seen a desiccant pack or really water be an issue at all.
Yeah, that's one of the
But
advantages is the shelf life
yeah,
of it. So yeah, if you're not going to use it, as you kind of mentioned before, instead of making too many, vape carts, let's use it, or shatter or something. Wait till you got the order, fulfill the order, and we're talking about just in time manufacturing as opposed to shit. Let's just make 50,000 carts and let's hope they sell. Let's maybe do 10,000 at a time instead, and kind of roll them out that way. And then maybe there's a shift in demand. Maybe we don't need this, or we want a new flavor, or we want to divert that to a different SKU. It just gives you ultimate versatility and agility in an ever-changing market demand, and these different areas. So
yeah. How big is that the crystallizer?
It's 65 liters, but 50 working liters is the standard one. We also have a smaller one. It's an 8-inch version. I don't know the volume of that, but if you're interested, just make sure you have a question in this chat, and I can get you a volume if you're really interested in the 8-inch version. But yeah, 50 working liter volumes on the standard crystallizer.
Yeah, for sure. Andrew, don't put THCA in your vape carts, and then you won't have THCA clogging your vape carts. It's an easy solution to your problem.
Absolutely.
I
Um,
think we pretty much covered them
we've hit all
all.
the questions. I guess the last thing that I
Yeah,
have for you guys is this is one example of education that we do, webinars. Obviously, it's an easy one for everyone to kind of jump onto a quick call. But we also, we in the past have hosted in-person seminars at our demo facility. This is a great opportunity to not only network with like-minded individuals, but also get your hands on the equipment, see how it works. Actually, we run real biomass in these seminars. If you're interested, we don't have anything planned for this year yet, but obviously, if there's some demand for it, if you are interested in getting more information on what a seminar looks like and costs and some more details on it, and you're interested in coming out, just write seminar in the questions as well. We always just want to be mindful of, if people want to get hands-on with this equipment, we can definitely handle that as part of our education outreach. So put
yeah. You
seminar
guys
in the
have a
chat.
great R&D facility up in Canada. I really like what you guys did there.
Cool.
Christopher asked about representation in Europe. I personally will be in Berlin at the end of the month for ICBC. You guys go over to Europe a decent amount, right?
No, we don't have representation there. It seems to be a little bit not ready for us yet, but
Right.
if you're, yeah, I mean, we're always keeping our finger on the pulse to see if there is something. We do have clients currently exporting, Australia and into Europe as well, THC isolate that are running our equipment. So export has kind of started, but in terms of actual production, not yet. Can't wait for it, but
Yeah,
not yet.
yeah. You guys need to grow more weed first
Yeah.
over there in Europe.
Extraction's the last piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, you need to grow a bunch more weed, and then we'll extract it.
Cool. Well, I don't really see any other questions. If you've got one, maybe quickly post it in there and we'll try to get it answered. If not, thank you so much for jumping on and taking some time out of your day to listen to us talk. And again, if you've got any questions, that maybe we didn't answer or you wanted to reach out directly, be sure to do that. My email is matt@evolvedextraction.com. I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. And again, if you're interested in Adam and I coming out and doing an optimization audit at your site, we'd be more than happy to do that. Just write audit in the chat and we'll make sure to reach out to you guys. Thanks for joining us. Yeah, thanks, Dustin. Always a pleasure.
Yeah, anytime. Likewise. Thank you, everyone.
Cool, guys. Thanks.